Look, it was bound to happen. Two teams clashing over the radio. But one will learn from it, the other probably won't. And no one's talking about this contrasting story, because Miami exposed Ferrari and Williams came out smiling. Having said that though, Miami should have been an absolute triumph for Williams. Both drivers scoring big and leaving Haas for dust. But instead, a familiar problem resurfaced, a radio miscommunication. Them scoring 12 points in Miami came with a cautionary tale, but one that they will hopefully learn from and grow as a team. Better to get this out of the way now than next year when it may really matter, and they could easily find themselves with the FW48 gunning for a title. Make no mistake, whilst the initial blowback was fierce, Williams will come out of the Miami Grand Prix a heck of a lot stronger operationally speaking. And that early season potential, it's now manifesting and maturing into something real. This is no joke. Williams are really in a good place right now. Nearly 40 points in 6 races. They have scored in almost every single Grand Prix weekend. When was the last time we could genuinely say that about this team? But it came with a price tag though. Yet another intra-team mix-up or lack of communication that nearly derailed their day. Because remember in Japan when Alex really got angry lambasting the pitbull, saying they absolutely made no sense. It was the kind of hiccup that championship-winning outfits know all too well, and something that Williams needs to remind themselves of. Now, I can understand why not many people are really talking about this, because during the Miami Grand Prix, there was a lot to talk about concerning the top 3 and the likes of George Russell. And then, of course, a debate that I think will be one of the buzzwords of 2025 regarding the matter of, does he actually own the corner? But what I want to talk about today, I think is incredibly important when you compare two legacy teams in the form of Williams and Ferrari. Their narratives, sort of similar, but having completely different outcomes. Not just sitting pretty in 9th and 10th and feeling quite jammy, not even going out for a lap, they were properly in the mix right in the middle of the top 10, beating Ferrari. But then in the span of 20 minutes, Sainz picked up floor damage after taking evasive action from Norris rejoining the track, tapping Albon's rear end then, losing places, and already compromised on used medium tyres, about 4 laps older according to the likes of Sainz, than those around him. And then we got cantankerous Carlos for the rest of the race, him being overly aggressive to try and make up the difference with a damaged car, scrubbed tyres more so than others, and generally not being in the best of moods. Which, as we saw, manifested itself into that last-minute dime bomb on Hamilton. So yeah, Carlos was driving angry, let's just say that. And then on the radio, after the race, in the cooldown lap, he was not having it, saying that his confidence had been severely dented, that he was not in a good place at that time, and James was quickly on the blower saying, yeah, right, we'll get this sorted out, mate, don't worry. Sainz saying that that's not the way he goes racing, so he told them off big time. If there is a silver lining to this though, James Vowles did accept this and promised changes that would be made in time for Imola, but the optics here really matter on first glance, because my initial perception before I really looked into this, and this is admittedly one of the pitfalls of doing a winners and losers video trying to cover all 20 drivers in less than half an hour, it would have made Williams out to look like an utter shambles and they were continuing to make mistakes, and it would make Carlos out to be completely incompetent, that he was overly aggressive and he couldn't actually keep ahead of Albon for the course of a race. You have to really look at the details to find out that really, Sainz was fighting a damaged car with compromised tyres. Therefore, he was off his game, and then he was completely flustered by Albon going round the outside, thinking probably that Alex had defied orders and decided to try and usurp the leadership role. All of that talk about not wanting driver politics, in Carlos's mind at the time, would have been completely laid bare, and then he'd have to reevaluate his entire relationship with the team. But the reality is that Sainz was subjected to an operational gaffe and disjointed instructions, simply as Alex got told something before Carlos did, and the pair were on top of each other without any other time to react. But the world feed would have simply seen Carlos be swallowed up by Alex, and the phrase skill issue would have reigned supreme. Well, okay, so what actually happened, Law? What was the situation with both cars? Well, simply put, both cars were compromised in some shape or form. In the case of what I just said with Carlos, he had not so great tyres and he was also dealing with floor damage, and in the case of Alex Albon, he was nursing a suspected water pressure problem, which ultimately did clear up and then he could go full pelt again. But at that time, it was a real big concern that they could have ended up with a DNF. And then on top of that, Carlos was expected to play the good guy and do what he did in Jeddah and hold position to give Albon DRS. and then he was told Albon had got the message that the whole position thing was there, the status quo, only for the Thai driver to pass him moments later. But then Alex would go on to explain that he only received the position call as he was making the move, and backed it up by noting that they'd been free to race up until that point. So naturally that would have caused some confusion. Albon was in a hurry, and Sainz was not privy to what was going on, the situation. And then to top it off, Alex was really chomping at the bit here because he was saying in his post-race interviews that he could see George and Max ahead of him. And then he went to joke that he never seen Verstappen on track before, not even when he was his teammate at Red Bull, that this was the form of his life. So naturally, he's going to be fired up. And if he's been told that you don't have to hold position anymore, you can go for it, then he's going to go for it. But you can understand why Carlos was felt blindsided, even betrayed, especially after his assertions later on that he had been a team player at the last race, protecting Albon from the two incoming racing bulls using his patented Singapore technique. So yes, cue the media, both traditional and social, to go absolutely nuts, thinking there's an absolute powder keg happening at Williams. That all the talk that James had been saying about transparency and unity, oh, that was a load of guff. So naturally, James has to get on the blower to everyone who will listen for about 2 hours or so, and say that basically the error was simply down to the pit wall and not the drivers. They were not fighting amongst themselves, the team simply messed up on their end. There's no favoritism going on, it's just simply a situation that arose for having two experienced drivers, that they had these guys who had really high standards, and that the pit wall simply did not meet their high standards, simple as. And it really helped that both drivers were able to accept this explanation, the matter was diffused, and that they would learn from it and move on. And then upon reflection, probably from both men, he probably would have lost the position anyway because, he had damage, his tyres were going off, he would have been holding up Alex, and then his tyres would have been baked, and no one would have actually progressed. But again, the communication thing, that was a major issue. But what makes this a better story, though, is that this wasn't taking place over the matter of 12th place or something like that. The points that he got from this race alone increased their points tally by nigh on 50%. But the truth is, though, with that and all of the stuff they said in the media, is that Williams is not hiding away from the matter. They are tackling this head on with utter transparency and making things clear, and that they say it won't happen again and that they will progress, and then by the time you get to Imola, they will be a better team for it. That they just own it. They just own the mistake. But yes, Williams has thankfully turned the incident into a positive, and it's proved that their pace is a genuine threat, so they've come out smelling of roses anyway. And whilst it was a cause for concern, the fires were put out almost instantly. So here's hoping that they have genuinely extinguished this problem and not just watered down the embers that could easily just go boom again, which is kind of like what was happening at Ferrari at the moment. And their situation plays handily-dandily in today's ladder yap. Whilst Williams owned their mistake, Ferrari by contrast responded with confusion and vagueness, making Williams look even better. As you know, during the race, Hamilton was stuck behind Leclerc as both were chasing Antonelli in 6th. Not exactly great optics for the Scuderia, but there you go. And hey, I'm a well-wisher for Ferrari here, and I want them to be able to challenge McLaren. I'm feeling your pain. The pit wall hesitated on issuing clear orders, prompting blowback from both drivers, which evolved into sarcastic remarks from Hamilton revolving around tea breaks, as he was potentially looking at the prospect of 9th with a rampaging Sainz in his mirrors, who then did subsequently rampage. Ferrari did eventually let Hamilton through to have a try with Antonelli, but it did cost them time, about 3 laps or so. And then not long after that, you had Leclerc on the mediums then saying that he could easily go faster and that his tyres are being baked because, as we know, with the dirty air, if you're too close to your teammate in DRS, it could easily cook your tyres. And therefore the team reversed the order when Lewis was simply not getting close enough to Antonelli with time running out. As you could then tell, it descended into an awkward situation because I think Lewis was not told immediately that this was the case. And the situation with Leclerc and Hamilton, it just summed up the frustration with Ferrari's indecision, which was a trend all weekend after witnessing Leclerc going to the wall and going out on inters at the worst time possible. Post-race, Ferrari maintained a more closed stance, with Lewis referring to his messages as a mixture of pressure and sarcasm. And then it was reported he even told Fred Vasseur to calm down about the entire situation. I know you're trying to help Lewis, but with all due respect, Fred Vasseur is finding it really difficult at the moment, probably, to stay calm, because I'm pretty sure that if this continues, and Ferrari finishes 4th in the Constructors, being nowhere close to Red Bull, Mercedes and McLaren, guess whose head's going to be on the chopping block? Because I don't think Vigna or Elkan are going to be taking accountability for this. Fred, as historically has been the case with team principals in the past, he'll get the chop. Meanwhile, Leclerc was trying his best to keep his criticism internal, saying that this was not the way to manage a race. And Vasseur himself said the drivers followed protocol, the delay was to confirm Hamilton's pace. Many saw it as more of Ferrari's chronic indecision, a trait McLaren's also been accused of. In contrast, Williams' more transparent handling of the situation earned them sympathy once the dust had settled. Their error was chalked up to being just in a new competitive position, having both drivers gunning for more points. Do you remember that bit down the start-finish straight where Albon was making a move to overtake somebody, and then just a few seconds behind them, Carlos was doing the same thing? Seeing Williams on the move, taking names, was incredible. It really just goes to show that the team culture from both Williams and Ferrari in the same scenario just brings different results, and one is a lot more healthy, one is a lot more toxic. And they're both legacy teams as well, they're not new. Their contrasting responses really show how their bosses run the show. Into his third season in charge, you get the sense that Vowles is now free to truly flex his Mercedes-inspired ethos of accountability and clarity, now having ironed out the fundamental quirks of the base team's operations, i.e. Excel spreadsheets. He encourages both his drivers to race, but when it really compromises the team's integrity itself, he is not afraid to step in and stop it. He does not want driver politics muddying any waters at all, because he stressed that he would not have signed Carlos Sainz if he thought that he was going to make situations awkward with Alex. I mean, come on, James has experience because he was right there in the thick of it in 2016 with Hamilton and Rosberg. Do you really think, like with Toto, he would want to suffer the same situation again with his own team? Nah. I don't think so. And Sainz, despite his post-race frustration, reiterated that he still trusts Vowles' long-term vision, and one misstep wasn't going to shake that over the course of the 2-year deal that they have. By contrast, and I have spoken about this before, you've only got to look at Fred Vasseur, and you've got to look at the Ralph Wiggum meme and think, oh, I am in danger right now. He's in charge of F1's most scrutinized team, even more so than Red Bull. His leadership, more guarded, more defensive. He defended the team's decision-making regarding the Antonelli attack as methodical, not hesitant, and showed no signs of changing course. It really marks out James and Fred as two different people, and them handling the same situation of a clash over the radio between their drivers? Yeah, it's night and day. And Fred, regarding the whole situation about dealing with his drivers, he just said, well, that's just the way it is, and he wouldn't take accountability for it himself. And again, that's nothing like James. But nevertheless, the radio communication spoke volumes, even though on the world feed you don't get the full picture, because I do recall Anthony Davidson on Sky Sports wanting to lay out the full picture of the Ferrari incident, so that means you didn't get the same confusion you had in Shanghai, as well as the anger. Williams' exchanges, though very flawed, remained respectful and constructive. One might say the team suffered from too little communication in that crucial moment, whereas Ferrari suffered from too much. These are two different failure modes that each team must address. You get the feeling that James will probably take a look at this data and then for Imola impose some sort of situation where a hold position call is given out to both drivers at the same time, like there's some kind of override situation where both race engineers are told to tell the drivers at the same moment about what is going on instead of having a few seconds delay, which was proven in Miami, could easily make the difference and make the situation all the more awkward. In fact, judging from James's conduct, is probably already in place. And you get the sense with Ferrari, it would be a lot trickier to impose a solution and a fix. They really need to streamline things on the pit wall to avoid inciting their drivers' ire. In Miami, Hamilton openly mocked how long his engineers debated, and Leclerc essentially said, let's just shut up and race. You just get the sense that Ferrari are just tippy-toeing around the situation of having two alpha drivers at the same time, which is something they don't often experience. The last time I can remember they had something of this magnitude is when you had Prost and Mansell, and look how that turned out. For Vasseur, right now, he has to stop deflecting. He has to just accept that they need to change some things to keep both drivers, these really big star drivers, on the same page, or it may cost him his job. Another reason why I think Williams handled this really, really well is that, sure, they were both in the points at the time, but this was a luxury of theirs, that this wasn't the goal of 2025, because their goal, as we know, is 2026. The team remains focused on the FW48, next year's car. They have ceased further development on the FW47, save for any minor track-specific tweaks maybe, or, as James Vowles I think put it, using sticky back plasters or something like that, just to bodge some things together ad hoc. The wind tunnel time now being afforded to next year's car, and I think that's a really smart move, because I think in the next couple of months the ATR time will be reset again as to where everyone is in the constructors at the moment. Williams, they got the allocation of 9th place still. In July, I think, they will then be allocated to 5th, therefore they will have less time. But I'm seeing a lot of articles out there telling Williams, oh, come on, you're 5th place, give it a try, go for glory, way, you're never going to have this situation again. I mean, yeah. What they're doing right now, it would make sense for a rebuilding team that wouldn't be anywhere close to leading the midfield, and Vowles' hopes for this year were just not to finish last. But with nearly 40 points in 6 races, pressure is mounting to go in for this year as well. And Carlos has admitted the car felt really close to the front, saying that he'd love to improve the car some more in a couple of places. But this does create a paradox though. The car can fight in the midfield. Heck, it can even lead it. But I don't think James is going to back down from what he's got planned, much like how Ross Brawn wouldn't back down in 2008. As far as Vowles is concerned, the car that Albon and Sainz are driving right now, save for a couple of track-specific beam wings or whatnot, that's your lot. And that makes days like Miami all the more critical that, operationally speaking, if they find themselves in positions where they are going to score big, they need to make sure that both drivers are communicating with each other quickly and that there are no foul-ups, because it could easily cost them points, because Carlos said himself that he knew that there could be bigger points to be had. And may I remind you about the early season domination Red Bull had? This is just the same thing playing out in the midfield. If Williams can get all of these points right now at the start of the season, much like with Red Bull and Max Verstappen in 2024, it can make the second half of the season all the more comfortable because you've got a buffer. And then added to that, all of the midfield teams will have to make the call about when to stop development on this year's car and move on to the next. Williams would have already made that, they'd have already gotten their points, and therefore it could easily lock in at least 6th in the constructors. True to their future-focused mindset, they treated the misstep like a systems failure. Isolate the issue, fix the protocol, move forward, rather than be in 2026 and have one of these miscommunications and be in a position where Ferrari are in right now, when it could easily cause a lot of friction between the drivers and the team itself, and they would have to quickly find a fix in order to preserve their status of being competitive with leading the constructors. Right now, they're sitting pretty in 5th, they still scored a lot of points, so therefore it was a low-stakes situation for a high-stakes problem. It was one of the things that Vowles learnt a lot from when he was in charge of strategy over at Mercedes, and that is something that he's now bringing to the team here. Because come on, Mercedes puts out all of these transparent overviews of the race and goes into detail about what they did and how they did it and why. This is something we're seeing with James here as well. There were very big, deep internal reviews. And I am really pleased to see that Alex is relishing all of this at the moment. This is great for him, because he wasn't nearly as perky as he was when he was at Red Bull. He's having the absolute best season of his career. But despite this, though, the weekend proved that, sure, they could just get one hand out of the podium, almost trying to get it, and the trackside thing just showed that they weren't quite there yet. There is still a lot to fix. Yeah, having said that, it certainly did help that none of their rivals scored, so they could say that at least, that they're the only ones in the midfield that got a couple of points, well, 12. And hey, for this next section of the video, I want to bring in Franco Colapinto, since he is in the news right now for various reasons. Imagine if Williams had failed to bag Sainz and gave Franco the 2025 seat instead. Miami could have looked very different. You might have had a continuation of what went down in 2024, where sure, you had the dynamic of Alex being the leader and Colapinto being the guy to step in for Logan Sargent, but as we did see, even though we saw a lot of crashes from Franco as part of the FW46 being completely undrivable and leading the Destructors Championship, things might have played out differently, where right now, in the Destructors Championship, Williams are nowhere near the top of that championship. They're not even on the podium, they're just propping up the top 5, which is a huge, stark contrast from where they were this time last year. I am so glad to see this, as I can imagine the people in the garage are. And considering how good Franco was in those first few races, if he had a car that was a lot more stable, and a car that he may have had some insight into being one of the academy drivers in the simulator, then who's to say how well he might have performed? But yeah, you can easily imagine that there are lots of ifs and buts, and I could easily see that if it really led to the point where they would still been fifth of the constructors, the dynamic could easily have been leading to conflict and tension and awkwardness. And passionate remarks from the Argentinian fanbase, because I could easily imagine that they would have loved seeing Colapinto in blue. But in a car this competitive, managing a hungry rookie and a proven lead driver, it would have sparked more friction than form. And the team would have been dealing with having to reassure Alex of his status and managing Franco's desire to kick on, all the while the team's trying to transition itself into a new era. So clearly, a lot to juggle. But Williams did not choose the simple route. They went for Carlos Sainz and they got him. And early results have justified the call, even though we have seen a fair few high-profile crashes along the way, but nowhere near as dramatic as we saw last year, thankfully, for them. Also, having two experienced drivers brings deeper technical feedback, sharper development insights, and reliable points. Things that Colapinto right now could not possibly deliver. let's be real. And hey, even though I'm a Carlos Sainz fan, I am more than happy to say that Alex Albon has been bringing home the bacon for Williams. He's been the one getting the high-profile results, 2 top 5 finishes in just 6 races. Sainz has steadily been improving and getting over his initial frustrations of thinking that he understood the car in testing and then suddenly he didn't in Melbourne and then in China. But now he is at that point in qualifying where it really matters this year, as Piastri has been saying, that he is close to Alex and now out-qualifying him. That they can help each other out. Maybe see if they can get away from just being 9th and 10th and making cameo appearances. That they are legit within the front-running mix at times. And I'm also seeing similarities with Carlos this year that I saw with Lewis in his first year with Mercedes. That, yeah, the car wasn't built around him, but he adapted. And then the following year, when both men were fully integrated, they flew, they soared, and Lewis went on to his 2nd World Championship. Next year, Carlos, he would be better integrated with the FW48, as will Alex. They will have a car that could easily be one of the best, with Mercedes power, and they could be real contenders for victories, maybe even a title run to begin with. And Miami was a clear example of the trade-off they made with getting Carlos. A rookie, Franco, might have followed orders quietly, lacking the confidence to challenge them or call them out to the media, or at least in English-speaking interviews. Sainz isn't a rookie. He demanded clarity, and the team owned up to it. The pressure brings out their best. And may I remind you that they are trying their best, Alex and Carlos, to really make it clear that they are in this together, that they're not out to try and one-up the other, because you can easily assume that after the crash in Melbourne, the debut race of Carlos at Williams, like he would have just stomped off to his room or wherever and then closed the door. He helped out Alex on the radio, and then Alex got such a great result. Now that is something you don't often see within Formula One, drivers helping each other out this much. So therefore you get the sense that having 2 experienced drivers like this who have been through thick and thin and have mutual origin stories, that they are going to push each other along really, really considerably and harmoniously. And if you had Franco and Alex, yeah, you would have had a dynamic that would have been quite straightforward, but it could easily cause some ructions and tensions and, of course, online drama. And then, of course, Alex's confidence would have been dented, and then you would have felt like eventually he would have been out of the sport. No, no, no. Right now, Alex, he's better than ever. And who knows, when the time comes when Alex or Carlos moves on to another team or they retire from the sport, and if the relationship with Alpine goes sour with Franco, then he may come back to Williams, because let's not forget, James Vowles said that Franco is still his driver and he will be back in Grove. When he does, Williams will be in such a better condition than Franco was when he left to go to Alpine Team Instant. He'd have gained some experience himself with the Alpine Academy, which, sure, it's a bit of a joke right now, but their infrastructure is pretty sound. He will be such a transformed driver, and he will be at the peak of his game, returning to a team that may be near the top still come the end of the decade. Now that's going to be spicy, right? Anyway, after the dust settled in Miami, Williams had reason for both pride and reflection. They could race Ferrari and Mercedes on merit. Yes, the Miami mishap was frustrating, but exposed a fixable flaw: trackside execution. The car right now, that's fine. They don't need to worry about that. Now they can focus on really building up their infrastructure behind the car and really enhance how they go racing on the track. So that means the day-to-day operations, the communication on the pit wall, it can all be refined this year. They've got 2 drivers who are on the same page and willing to push each other along, which in turn will help out the team even more so, which is just a never-ending cycle of hope and optimism. Whereas with Ferrari, you're seeing a never-ending cycle of pessimism and doom and scapegoating, and Fred is fighting for his life here, which is why I am so sad the divide between the car company and the race team has been eroded. Enzo Ferrari will be turning in his grave right now. Yes, so far Sainz and Albon have played ball, but it could easily change if Williams are at the top. We're seeing this almost play out with McLaren at the moment, because I saw that clip of Lando talking about Max and Oscar's like, what the, what? So what's going to happen if we see a similar thing with Albon and Sainz if they're fighting for a title, and this FW48 turns out to be a rocket ship? Will Williams continue to resist the urge of giving the status of number 1 to one of their drivers? Because if they do that, I don't think Carlos will take that lightly, because he left Ferrari and chose Williams to avoid that particular scenario. So I doubt that he would be taking that lightly unless it is he that gets the leadership role. But yes, it's safe to say there will be potential flashpoints. And whilst the Miami mix-up was ultimately a mistake, a genuine one, future incidents may carry deeper implications. Both drivers want to maximise every single chance they get, and with no upgrades coming, Every race matters. Vowles has promised transparency, trust, fairness to both Alex and Carlos, and now this year it's time to prove that that is absolutely true, and this is not just wind and noise and air just to try and convince them to either stay or come over to the team. And thankfully, Miami is proven to be proof positive. And what makes James's achievements all the more impressive and respectable is that Ferrari and Vasseur have proven that it's easier said than done. And it does help Williams that they're not under the same crushing amount of pressure. At least not yet. That positive momentum helps unify the team, and both drivers speak of enjoying the fight at the front, which fosters their bond all the more. But you do get the sense that this year they are straddling the line of being the underdog and a genuine contender for points and podiums. You know, having the joy of beating Ferrari on occasion, whilst also having to deal with their small costly errors. So there is some accountability to have, but they can easily have some fun at the top. And how the team evolves this year, we'll see how they actually play out for next year too. For now, the Albon-Sainz pairing is working, fast, competitive, helping the team grow and what have you. Colapinto or any future rookie will find a Williams far more prepared when they actually get there for internal battles. And yes, the Miami Grand Prix at first, in terms of the basic optics, looked painful, awkward, and a real cause for concern. But it ultimately showed that Williams knew how to lead, whereas Ferrari showed that they do not know how to lead. And if you think Ferrari's current chaos is bad, wait until Charles and Lewis leave. Will Antonelli and Behrman thrive or inherit the mess? To find out how I managed to crowbar that idea into a long 24-minute video, watch this video next, straight after this one.